In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. You may have noticed that I am interested in the origins of interesting phrases. And what I heard recently was an interesting one, by hook or by crook. And what I found out is that we really don't know where that phrase came from, by hook or by crook. What we use it to say is that there's really only two ways to go. You can go by hook or by crook. Some people say it's about either fishing or by shepherding. You've got to eat somehow, by hook or by crook. But the idea is that there's really only two ways that we can do something. And what I want to share with you today is that that is absolutely true. There are really only two ways that we can live our life. And we're going to look at them today in a little bit of detail. The first is one that we associate with today, being St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you. When unfortunately we think of St. Patrick's Day, sadly, we think of things like green beer and parades. Actually, we're going to talk a lot about St. Patrick today because he had nothing to do with what many people think St. Patrick's Day is all about. And if you are Irish and you're proud to be Irish today, I'm proud of you too, but I'm sad to tell you, St. Patrick wasn't Irish. He was actually a Roman living in Britain. We don't know if he was therefore Italian or British. The Italian and the British, you can fight for him if you want. But he was a young man living in the Roman province in Britain. And as a young man, he was captured. He was at that point taken to Ireland and raised there in slavery. And that's how he learned the languages of Ireland that he would use later on when he went back to be Ireland's enlightener. But he lived a very hard life in slavery until he received the first of two visions he received in his youth. One was to say he would be released. And he received that vision, and he put faith in the vision that God was going to release him from slavery, and someday he would be free of it. And so he lived part of his young life just waiting for that time to come. Then the second vision came. And the vision was this, a voice telling him, the boat has arrived. Now, one problem. Where he's living, it's 200 miles to the ocean. He has a tough decision to make. The boat has arrived. Where do I go? He could follow that vision in faith and walk 200 miles. Or he might decide, I better be a little smart about this. What most people associate with St. Patrick was that he had the luck of the Irish. What we learned from studying his life is luck had nothing to do with him. He wasn't about luck. He wasn't thinking, maybe I'll get lucky and find the boat from the vision. What St. Patrick did on that fateful day was to step out into faith. Because if you think about it, there's really only two ways we can live our lives. Now, we would never, any of us, I think, say, well, I'm going to rely on luck. No, we don't say that to ourselves. We say, though, in ways subtly and overtly, in some ways less overtly to ourselves, I'm going to live by my smarts. I'm going to plan things well. I'm going to do what you're supposed to do when you do it smart. And I'm going to succeed through my intelligence. And let me say, first of all, that that's a good thing to do. It's good to plan and to use the intelligence God gives us. But if any of us credit our success, with whatever success we have, with our intelligence, I invite you to go down someday to the emergency room. Lots of people doing things very smartly, and in things that were completely outside of their control, life threw them a curveball. Let's be honest. Most of what we think we control, we do not. How much of our life can we really control? Whether you go to church or a mosque and think you're going to be safe, whether you invest and you think, oh, I put all my investments in the right place. Guess what I found out this week? Guess how many fund managers, experts in the field of investing, beat the S&P 500 on an annual basis. 1 out of 3. 2/3 of the experts of finance can't beat a fixed listing of companies in their intelligent investing of our money. And they're the experts. So what we might call intelligence and planning, there's a measure of that. But really, so much of what we credit to ourselves is luck. But what St. Patrick is teaching us today is that's no way to live our life or base our decisions. What did he do instead? He stepped out in faith. He did go and he found that boat. And it was there waiting for him like the vision told him. It took him back to his family. He grew up back in Roman Britain. He decided to dedicate his life to God, and he wanted to study for the holy priesthood, and he did that. He went to what was then called Gaul. We call it today France. And then because of his skill in the languages of Ireland, he was sent back there as a missionary. And that's the real celebration today. You take away all the green beer and all the silliness. What we celebrate today is the gospel coming to Ireland. Now, he wasn't the first to bring the gospel there. St. Patrick had others that had preceded him. But he was the most successful. It was after his lifetime that there were churches and monasteries thrown all about that island. And so we rightly call him the enlightener of Ireland. He was a great theologian. That shamrock you see him holding in all those silly little signs wasn't just a fun thing to do, or wasn't a good luck charm. The shamrock was his very intelligent way of explaining the all-holy Trinity. St. Patrick was an Orthodox theologian. And he pulled that little leaf off the ground, and in that 3-in-1 said, "This is an image of the Trinity." And he taught Orthodox theology in its preciseness. And he said, "You've heard that there's one God. It's true, there is one God. But we know that God in 3 persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as you see them united here in the clover of the shamrock." So he was a man of great intelligence, a great theologian, but essentially he was a man of faith. And he says to you and he says to me today, we have 2 choices we can live. Live by what we think are our skills, which when we're honest and accurate is much more about luck than we would like to admit. Or the second choice, he says to us, live by faith. That's how he lived his life, and he invites us to do the same. If we heard the epistle this morning, we heard of all those characters and personalities from the Old Testament, whose essential character was faith. We heard it was by faith Moses left the glories of Egypt. By faith, all those different personalities in the Old Testament. It was by faith they did it. And then we heard one final sentence toward the end of the reading. All of them, in spite of all their great faith, did not receive what you and I have received. We saw the coming of the hope of their faith. And we live after the coming of Jesus Christ. The Gospel tells of the coming of Jesus as he came to 2 of his disciples. First, Philip sees him preaching. Then he goes and tells Nathanael. He says, "Could this be the one who is to redeem Israel?" And Nathanael has a choice. He'll go to meet Jesus, and Jesus is going to tell him, "Follow me." If he decides to think about that invitation from his intelligence, from his so-called skill, which, as we said, is much more about luck, he's not going to make that choice. Why would he leave what we can only assume was some kind of paying position in some company somewhere? He was earning a living. He was eating. He was going to leave all of that and follow this man who isn't even an authorized preacher. This man, Jesus, has no home. And he says to Philip and Nathanael, "Come and follow me." That would be the stupidest thing if we're going to judge our actions by knowledge or skill. But Philip and Nathanael followed Jesus in faith. They weren't perfect in it. Jesus will scold them time and time again for their lack of faith. These two men who left everything to follow Jesus, Jesus will turn to them later on and say, if you only had a little bit of faith, just as much as a mustard seed, you could move a mountain. But still, what faith they had, they stepped out in faith. Today is the Sunday of Orthodox. That's why we have heard that gospel today. When Philip tells Nathanael, come and see, that's an invitation not only to them, but to us. Thanks be to the fathers of the Seventh Council and those that follow them that brought us back into orthodoxy. This is the Sunday of Orthodoxy, when the icons came back to the church. And we can come into the church and we can see. We stand before this beautiful iconostas and we look into the eyes of God in the face of the icon of Jesus Christ. Is this something we do from our skill? From our intelligence? No. This we do out of our faith. So what does it look like to live a life of faith instead of a life relying on ourselves? Well, that's really the question it comes down to. Who do we trust? If we trust ourselves, our skill, our intelligence, our talents, really, as we've shown, we're really looking more, some of that, but a lot of luck. That's one way to live. But today, St. Patrick, St. Philip, St. Nathanael, and all the saints in all of these icons invite us to a different way of life. And that is a life of faith. And that life of faith has one question. Who do we trust? Do we trust ourselves? Or do we trust the God depicted in that icon? And if we do, what does that look like? Well, the main thing it looks like is when we face every decision we face in life, every challenge we face, what is the guiding principle for how we make that decision? Our own smarts and intelligence? We should apply them. But apply them to what? Apply them to our faith. Faith must be number one, or my brothers and sisters, it will not be number two. How many of us try to live a life where faith is a part of it, but it's not the guiding principle? It doesn't work. Those of you that have children, or nieces or nephews or grandchildren, if you want them to come to church when they're adults, bring them to church every Sunday. But if you only bring them on Sunday, guess what? They're not going to be coming in Sunday in 10 and 20 years. We've just completed the first week of Great Lent. We've had services every night, actually for the last about 10 days. We've been blessed by those. But how many of us in our intelligence said, we don't have time. We have other things we have to do. We think we're so smart. But how dumb we can be when faith isn't number one. My brothers and sisters, that's the invitation that we are invited to this week, to return faith to number one. Everything else comes second. All the schedules, all the smart, all the work, all the school, it can all come second. And guess what? Here's the trick. You put faith number one, everything that used to be number one, that now becomes 2, 3, and 4, it gets better. You want to get better in your job and your career? Put God first. You want to get better grades, or you want your kids to get better grades? Bring them to church and bring them more often. Build a life around God and watch God pour His mercy and His grace upon you. That's the life of invitation they're inviting us to. And too often we have not accepted the invitation. So I want to give you 2 challenges this morning. I want you to think of one decision this week that you're going to face. One decision. Maybe it's about how you're going to do a certain thing at work. Maybe a certain thing you're studying, or a certain relationship that's having some struggles. Think how you think you should do it based on your smarts and what you would do. And then stop and say, but if I live by faith in the Son of God, then what would I do? And then I want you to try it. Just that one situation. Act in that one situation in faith and see what God is going to do with each and every one of us. That's one challenge I want to leave you. Change one situation. The second one I want to challenge you with is, as we go into the second week of Lent, how are we going to live this week of Lent, not just any week, but this week, if we have faith? Are we going to come to every service? We might. We might not, but I'll tell you what, we'll have more people this week than last week. If we step out in faith. And my brothers and sisters, faith doesn't always make earthly sense, because it doesn't. But it makes heavenly sense. And when we act out in heavenly sense, guess what? Even things on earth go better. So those two challenges I want to leave to all of us. Make one decision based on faith, see what happens, and live Lent this week as faithful people. This is what it means to accept the invitation that St. Patrick and all the saints give us. My brothers and sisters, it's a blessed invitation. It's a blessed life. It is life itself. So on this day that we have accepted the invitation this morning to come and see, let's keep coming and seeing and following Jesus Christ as He invites us to follow Him all the way into His kingdom. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.